Hi everyone. We are moving into Peter's second letter to the churches of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia and Bithynia. The letter doesn't start with that list like the first one did, but in chapter 3 verse 1 we see Peter referencing the first letter, saying that this is the second time that he is writing to these churches. And it's a farewell letter. Peter also tells them that his life will end soon, and we don't know how he knows this. It may have been revealed to him by the Spirit, or he may just be sensing increasing pressure from the Roman authorities around him, or it may be a combination of both. But he's got a strong conviction about it, and in verse 14 he says, "Since I know that the putting off of my own body will be soon." Church tradition says that he was killed by the Roman authorities during the reign of Nero. And so we have the privilege today of reading this letter written by one of Jesus' friends as a final message to a group of churches. A message that Peter lived his life for, took to the grave, and counted worthy of dying for. And he was eager to put it into writing so that after his departure, like he says in verse 15, we might recall these things. And so, given the gravity of what he was facing, what is the message that he wanted to immortalize? What is the fundamental kind of big picture that he wanted the churches to grasp well, so that after he was gone, it would carry them through the inevitable trials and complexities that would come their way? Verse 3 and 4 give us that answer, and it's written in a way, it's kind of a stacked verse, and there's a lot of commas, and it makes it a bit hard to read and follow. But in effect, it says this. It says, through Jesus, we have access to a divine nature. And that nature, that divine nature, is apart from the corruption of the world that we live in. It's different. I was just thinking, imagine Peter writing these words, his final exhortation to these churches, and this wouldn't be the time to get into details of church structure or evangelistic strategies or parenting tips or something. He's saying, what is the big picture? What's the main thing that I want people to get? What's going to carry them through whatever happens after this? And it's this, that God has opened a door to a new life and a new nature, and it's different, and it is apart from the corruption around you, and it changes everything about how we understand our lives and how we deal with the trials that come our way. And we know that with 1 Peter as a backdrop, he's not messing around. If you remember some of the texts we dealt with there, this divine nature should saturate our lives and lead to living out a hope that makes people ask questions of us about our values and motivations and our lifestyles. Why do they live like that? That should be the natural response. He's saying, guys, I won't be around much longer, but please remember this. You've been brought into something remarkable, something long prophesied, something that is quite unlike the society and culture around you. And so don't get distracted by temporary trials and disagreements. The culture around you is going to try and woo you back into lethargy and mediocrity and sin, and you mustn't let them do it. And so in order to grow in this divine nature, he goes on and to become more like Jesus, he goes on to list a set of traits that he wants to see these churches grow in, and the churches that follow, just like ours today. And they are all important, and he's listed them all on purpose, but I just wanted to kind of zero in on two of them today. And the first one is faith. The first thing he says is, what do we add to our, well, he mentions faith, and then he lists things to add to that faith. But I just thought good to just stop and think about faith for a moment. Because if there's one thing that's under attack in the society we live in, I think, it's this idea of faith, that we would trust in something that we don't see. We live in a material world where people like to only trust in things that they feel like they can see and they can know. Or so the thinking goes. And while there is much historical evidence for Jesus and the disciples and the people that came before that, we don't just have to know that they existed. We have to have faith that what they said was actually true. And so the world likes to characterize faith as something exclusively in the domain of religion. And at times we might also feel like it's a little unfair that God just expects us to trust Him. Why are we expected to have faith while everyone else just gets to live? Why do I need to put my reputation on the line and take this risk when society is free to just exist and kind of go with the flow? But I want to suggest today that faith is not just confined to the religious community. It's just a bit more subtle in wider society, because it's not accompanied by some of the trappings of religion, like weekly meetings or like a religious text like the Bible. In the world today, 3 out of 4 people will profess to be either Christian, Muslim, Buddhist or Hindu. And so if you claim that there's no God, it's putting you at odds with 3 out of 4 people in the world, 3/4 of the world. I think that's a position which requires some faith. Some people might just avoid thinking about these things altogether. We know that for sure. But even for them, they're really just kicking the question down the road. They're going to have to come to a conviction about this at some point. Secularism also has its own doctrine. It has its own ideas about how relationships work best, about family structure, about how sexuality is expressed, how gender works, about what makes a person even. And so faith in the non-religious worldview might not come with the structure of organized religion, but it absolutely requires that you subscribe to a set of beliefs that permeate deeply into communities and individuals and family life. And so walking away from religion is not an abandonment of faith. It's actually just placing your faith in your own discernment and in the discernment of the people around you, the wisdom of the world. And so faith is not unique to religion. Everyone professes a faith in something. The idea that secularism is solid ground while religion is fantasy is crazy. Christianity shaped the values of the world that we live in today. It's been the true north for morality in the modern world for 2,000 years. Christianity offers a coherent design for life over the kind of reactive trial and error experimentation of secularism. And so in this environment, we need to heed Peter's call to sober-mindedness and to diligence and to being prepared for action as we think about what we have faith in and what the alternatives are. And so we must add knowledge to our faith, and we must interrogate our beliefs, and we must be ready to defend the hope that we have in Christ. And then we add self-control to live out that faith, and steadfastness so that we can do it in the long term. And finally, we add love to give it life. And love is the final trait, the second one I just want to spend some time on. It's the trait which crowns this list of godly characteristics, and that must be characteristic of us in, at times, hostile environments. Love sets us apart from the world. Love allows us to do more than just disagree with people. It turns the stale acquisition of knowledge into life-giving ministry. And it turns a well-disciplined, resolute, steadfast community of people into the champions of justice and compassion. It also covers a multitude of sins, which allows churches to last long term, despite the frailty and fragility of the human beings within them. And so, well, for Peter's audience and for ours, there was also a sense that their obedience to God was putting them at odds with the community around them, the culture around them. And we might also find ourselves pitted against a prevailing ideology or group of people as we go forward in this culture. And in that moment, you might start to feel a bit defensive or even combative at times, especially online. But Peter is asking for more than that. He's asking for a response that reflects Christ's response to us. A sacrificial, servant-hearted love for the very people who disagree with us. A response characterized by gentleness and respect, as he mentions in his first letter. Because we were condemned by the law, but we were saved by the person of Jesus, the mercy of Jesus. He loved us, and so he redeemed us, even though we were his enemies. And so as we bring the wisdom of God to our society, we must be characterized by that same merciful love in all of our engagements with the people around us. So as you work through the text today and discuss the questions, I just want to encourage you to remember that this is not a textbook. This is a letter written by one of Jesus' friends in earnest, knowing that he was willing to give his life for this message, and that this was a charge to churches and churches that would follow to help them recognize what the main things were. What are the main things you want to have settled in your heart for the long term? And so let the Spirit stir you, continue to sanctify you with these, and I look forward to chatting more, working through the discussion questions on Thursday. I'll see you then.